The night's soul burned red with neon and danger. Malcom Morretti believed that every person had a price and every woman had an expiration date. He sat in the velvet shadows of his private club, a king who had tasted everything and felt nothing, until Mila Cruz walked into the crosshairs of a man the entire underworld feared. She didn't command the room with a shout. She captured it with a whisper. That night, time stopped and the noise disappeared. Under the weight of $1,000 silk sheets, the man who never bowed found himself breathless, reaching a climax that didn't just satisfy his body, but cracked his cold ambition open like a wound that refused to close. For the first time in 40 years, the predator became the prey, and he realized one night would never be enough. The introduction, the midnight revelation. The reservation was for a world Malcom thought he controlled, but Mila was the surprise he never vetted. He was unused to a woman who looked at him not with calculated reverence or theatrical fear, but as if looking at a thunderstorm through glass, aware of the danger, yet unable to look away. In the heat of the moment, her strength matched his own, her soft-spoken grace giving way to a romantic fire that left the ruthless Don moaning for more. He had spent a lifetime treating people like assets, but as he held her, he realized she was the only real thing in his empire of shadows. Now, the man who used to let women walk away finds himself building an invisible architecture of protection just to keep her by his side. Can a man who lives by the sword learn to love out loud? If you believe that true love can melt even the coldest heart, like this video, subscribe for more intense Mafia romance, and comment below. Would you risk everything for a love that leaves you breathless? The sun crawled through the heavy velvet curtains of Malcom's bedroom, but the light felt different today. Usually, the morning was a cold time for Malcom Morretti. He would wake up, check his phone for messages from Jax or Miller, and forget the face of whoever had shared his bed the night before. Women were just passing shadows to him. They were toys he played with until he grew bored. But as he sat on the edge of the large bed, his heart beat with a strange, heavy rhythm. He looked at the empty space beside him. Mila was gone. She had slipped away before the birds even started to sing, leaving nothing behind but a faint scent on the silk sheets. It smelled like vanilla and something soft, like rain on flowers. Malcom closed his eyes and took a deep breath. For a man who ruled with an iron fist, he felt strangely weak. His body still remembered the way she moved. He could still hear his own voice moaning in the quiet dark, a sound he never made for anyone. He stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Outside, the city was waking up, but he didn't care about his empire today. He felt like a predator that had finally found something it couldn't kill or consume. A soft knock came at the door. "Boss, the meeting with the suppliers starts in 10 minutes, Jax called out from the hallway. Malcom didn't answer right away. He put on his charcoal suit jacket, feeling the weight of his power. Usually, he loved this feeling. Today, the suit felt like a cage. He walked out into the living area where Jax and Miller were waiting. They were tall, tough men who had been with him for years. They knew his moods, but today they both went quiet when they saw his face. "Is everything okay, Malcom?" Miller asked, his eyes darting around the room. "You look different." "Everything is fine," Malcom snapped, though his voice wasn't as sharp as usual. They sat down to talk about money and territory, but Malcom's mind was miles away. Every time Jax spoke about shipping docks, Malcom thought about the way Mila looked at him through the glass. Every time Miller mentioned a rival gang, Malcom remembered the fire in her eyes when they were close. He was a 40-year-old man who had seen everything, yet he was acting like a boy with his first crush. He looked at his hands. These were hands that had caused pain and built a world of fear, but now they felt empty. He realized he didn't want the meeting to end so he could go back to work. He wanted it to end so he could find her. The mysterious encounter from the night before hadn't just changed his schedule, it had changed his soul. He knew right then that he was finished with toys. He wanted the girl who had broken his silence. Malcom leaned back and stared at the door. He wasn't going to let her be a memory. He was going to make her his reality. Malcom did not like to wait. He was a man who usually got what he wanted the second he asked for it. But 3 days had passed since Mila left his bed, and his heart felt like it was trapped in a heavy fog. He spent his time in meetings, looking at maps of the city and counting money, but his mind kept going back to her. He could still feel the warmth of her skin and hear the soft way she spoke his name. He knew he had thousands of people who feared him, but none of them made him feel as alive as she did. "Boss, we found her," Jack said, walking into the office with a small piece of paper. He looked worried. Jax had worked for Malcom for a long time, and he had never seen the boss act like this over a woman. "She works at a small flower shop near the edge of the city. It is a quiet place, not our kind of place." Malcom took the paper. He didn't say thank you because he was too busy planning his next move. Normally, he would send a car and tell his guards to bring a woman to his house. He treated people like they were things he owned. But Mila was different. He remembered the way she looked at him, like she could see right through his expensive suits and his tough talk. He knew that if he forced her to come, he would lose the fire he saw in her eyes. "Get the car," Malcom said, standing up. "Just one car, no sirens, no loud music. And Miller, stay back. I am going in alone." The drive felt longer than it really was. When the black car pulled up to the flower shop, the neighborhood was peaceful. There were no neon lights or loud clubs here. Malcom stepped out, his tall frame looking out of place in the simple street. He pushed open the door, and a small bell chimed. The air inside was cool and smelled like roses and fresh earth. Mila was standing behind a wooden counter, trimming the stems of some white lilies. She looked up, and for a moment the world stopped moving. She didn't look scared. She didn't look like the other women who tried to impress him with jewels. She just looked at him with those deep, calm eyes. "I didn't think you would come," she said softly. Her voice was like music to his ears. Malcom walked closer until only the counter was between them. He was a 40-year-old Mafia boss who had survived wars, but his hands were shaking just a little bit. He didn't demand anything. He didn't bark an order. Instead, he looked at her with a look that was almost a plea. "One night was not enough," Malcom whispered. His voice was thick with a feeling he couldn't name. "I have everything in this city, but my house feels empty without you in it. I don't want to buy your time, Mila. I want you to be there because you want to be." He didn't offer her money. He offered her a choice. It was the first time in his life he had ever asked for permission. Mila looked at the white lilies in her hand and then back at him. A small, romantic smile touched her lips. She saw the shattered king standing in front of her, and she knew that the mysterious encounter from that night was only the beginning. The sun began to set, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and purple. Malcom had taken Mila to a private spot by the river, away from the prying eyes of his guards and the noise of the city. He wanted to show her that he wasn't just a man who gave orders. He was a man who could appreciate beauty. He had arranged a small, elegant table with fine food, but as they sat together, the air felt thick with a different kind of energy. It wasn't just about the scenery anymore. "You are very quiet tonight, Malcom," Mila said, her voice soft but steady. She wasn't looking at the river, she was looking directly at him. "Is it because you are used to people talking for you?" Malcom felt a jolt of surprise. No one ever challenged him like that. Most people tripped over their words when he was near. He leaned forward, his dark eyes meeting hers. "I am quiet because I am watching you," he admitted. "I am trying to understand how someone so soft can make a man like me feel so restless." Mila didn't look away. Instead, she stood up and walked around the table until she was standing right in front of him. The wind caught her hair, making it dance around her face. "Softness is not weakness, Malcom. It takes a lot of strength to stay kind in a world like yours." She reached out and placed her hand on his chest, right over his heart. Malcom felt his breath hitch. He had been in many fights and faced many dangers, but the touch of her small hand made his heart race faster than any battle ever had. He stood up, towering over her, but he didn't feel like the boss. He felt like a man who had finally met his match. He pulled her closer, his large hands resting on her waist. The romantic fire from their first night flared up again, hotter and more intense than before. In the moonlight, they moved together in a slow, rhythmic dance of attraction. Malcom found himself moaning low in his throat as he leaned down to kiss her. It wasn't a kiss of power or ownership, it was a kiss of surrender. In that moment, the ruthless Don realized that Mila's strength was equal to his own. She didn't use guns or money to get her way. She used her spirit. As they held each other by the water, Malcom knew he was falling into a deep, beautiful trap. He had spent 40 years thinking he was the strongest person in the room, but as Mila smiled up at him, he realized he had finally found the only person who could truly command his heart. He didn't want the night to end. He wanted to stay right there, in the heat of her love, forever. The iron gates of Malcom's estate opened slowly, like the mouth of a giant beast. As the car rolled up the long, paved driveway, Mila looked out the window at the high stone walls and the guards standing at every corner. It was beautiful, but it was also a fortress. Malcom watched her expression, his heart feeling a strange mix of pride and worry. He wanted to give her the world, but he knew his world was built on secrets and shadows. "This is your home now," Malcom said as they stepped into the grand hallway. The floors were made of polished white marble that shone like ice. Crystal lights hung from the ceiling, throwing tiny sparkles across the walls. "Everything you see belongs to you. If you want something, you only have to ask." Mila walked through the large rooms, her footsteps making soft tapping sounds. She touched the expensive paintings and the heavy silk curtains. It was a place of extreme luxury, but it felt very quiet. It was the kind of quiet that reminded her of how powerful Malcom really was. He wasn't just a man, he was a king who lived in a palace. Later that evening, Thomas, Malcom's oldest advisor, walked into the study. He found Malcom standing by the window, watching Mila as she sat in the garden below. "The men are talking, Malcom," Thomas said, his voice low and serious. "They see you spending time at flower shops and rivers. They see you bringing a stranger into the heart of our operations. They think the ruthless boss they feared is softening." Malcom didn't turn around. He kept his eyes on Mila. "Let them talk, Thomas. They don't understand what it's like to find something worth more than territory." "A beautiful woman is a distraction we cannot afford," Thomas warned. "If you make her your heart, you give your enemies a place to aim their fire. You are building a golden cage for her, but cages eventually break." Malcom finally turned, his eyes flashing with the old, cold fire. "It is not a cage, Thomas. It is a sanctuary, and anyone who tries to break it will have to go through me first." He left Thomas standing in the dark room and went out to the garden. The air was cool and smelled of the night flowers. When he found Mila, she was looking up at the moon. He sat beside her and took her hand. The contrast between his rough, scarred skin and her soft palm was a reminder of the two worlds they were trying to join together. "Do you feel safe here?" Malcom asked, his voice almost a whisper. Mila leaned her head on his shoulder. "I feel protected, Malcom, but I also feel like I am hidden away. I don't want to be a secret you keep behind high walls." Malcom pulled her closer, his protective grip tightening. He realized that giving her a palace was easy, but giving her a normal life would be the hardest fight of his life. He moaned softly, a sound of both love and frustration, as he buried his face in her hair. He had built a world to keep people out, but now he had to figure out how to let the world see that Mila Cruz was the most important part of his empire. For the first time, the golden walls he had built felt like they might be standing in the way of the love he had finally found. The grand ballroom was filled with the smell of expensive perfume and the quiet sound of people whispering. This was a high society event where the most powerful leaders of the underworld met to show off their wealth. Usually, Malcom walked into these rooms alone, his face like a stone wall that no one could climb. But tonight, the air felt electric. Every head turned as the large oak doors swung open. Malcom stepped into the light, looking every bit the ruthless Dawn in a sharp obsidian suit. But it was the woman on his arm who made the room go silent. Mila looked like a dream in a deep ruby-red silk dress that flowed behind her like a river of fire. She didn't look down at her feet or act shy. She walked with a soft, steady grace, her head held high. Malcom could feel the eyes of his rivals and his own men digging into them. He knew they were looking for a sign of weakness. Jax and Miller followed a few steps behind, their hands resting near their jackets, watching for any trouble. They looked nervous, but Malcom's grip on Mila's hand was firm and warm. He wasn't hiding her in a golden cage anymore. He was showing the world that she was his equal. Thomas stood near the bar, his face tight with worry. He watched as a rival boss, a man named Miller from a different family, stepped forward with a cold smile. "Malcom," the man said, his voice dripping like honey over a blade. "We heard you found a new pet. Is this the flower girl everyone is talking about?" The room went so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Malcolm's eyes turned into dark pits of ice. He stepped closer to the man, his large frame towering over him. The air became heavy with danger. But before Malcom could speak, Mila stepped forward. She didn't raise her voice. She just looked the man in the eye with her thunderstorm through glass gaze. "I am not a pet," Mila said softly. Her voice carries across the silent room. "And Malcom is not a man who keeps things he doesn't respect." Malcom felt a rush of pride that hit him harder than any drink. He reached out and placed his hand on the small of her back, pulling her close so everyone could see. He didn't care about business deals or territory in that moment. He only cared about the woman who was brave enough to stand by his side. "Let me make this clear for everyone," Malcom said, his voice booming like thunder. "Mila Cruz is not a guest. She is not a distraction. She is the woman who has my heart and my protection. If you disrespect her, you are declaring war on me." He leaned down and kissed her forehead in front of everyone. It was a romantic and bold move that changed everything. The whispers started again, but they were different now. They weren't whispering about a toy. They were whispering about a queen. As they walked through the crowd, Malcom felt a climax of emotion. He had spent 40 years being feared, but standing there with Mila, he finally felt like a man who was truly alive. He had made his choice, and now the whole world knew it. The rain drummed a steady beat against the glass of the penthouse windows, making the world outside look blurry and gray. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of cedarwood. Malcom sat in his large leather chair, but he wasn't looking at the city. He was leaning back with his eyes closed, his face tight with pain. Earlier that day, a small argument with a stubborn supplier had turned into a quick scuffle. While Malcom had won easily, a hidden blade had grazed his shoulder. To the world, he was a man made of stone, but in the quiet of his home, he was just a man who was bleeding. He heard the soft click of the door. Mila walked in, carrying a small bowl of warm water and some clean bandages. She didn't gasp or look frightened by the red stain on his white shirt. She moved toward him with that liquid grace he loved so much. Without a word, she knelt beside his chair and began to unbutton his shirt. Her fingers were steady and cool against his skin. "You don't have to do this," Malcom whispered, his voice sounding tired. "I have doctors for this." "The doctors see the boss," Mila said softly, not looking up. "I want to take care of Malcom." She carefully cleaned the wound. Malcom hissed through his teeth as the water touched the cut, but as Mila blew softly on his skin to cool the sting, he felt his whole body relax. He looked down at her dark hair and the way her thunderstorm eyes were focused only on helping him. In this moment, there were no guards, no rivals, and no gold cages. There was just a woman caring for a man. As she wrapped the white bandage around his shoulder, Mila leaned her forehead against his arm. "You spend so much time protecting everyone else," she said. "Who protects you?" Malcom felt a lump in his throat. He had spent 40 years being a shield for his family and his business, but no one had ever asked him that question. He reached out with his good arm and pulled her into his lap. He moaned low in his throat, a sound that was full of both relief and a deep, romantic hunger. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, feeling the soft beat of her heart against his own. "I didn't know I was lonely until I met you," Malcom admitted. It was the most honest thing he had ever said. He was showing her his secret vulnerability, not the wound on his shoulder, but the fact that he needed her to feel whole. Mila held him back, her small hands stroking his hair. The silence in the room was beautiful and heavy. Malcom realized that this quiet moment of care was more powerful than any public declaration. He was a king who had finally found a place to rest his head. As the rain continued to fall outside, he knew that his heart was no longer a wound that refused to close. It was a place that Mila Cruz now called home. He didn't want to move. He only wanted to stay in the warmth of her love, safe from the shadows of his life. The peace of the penthouse did not last long. While Malcom was resting, the news of his public declaration was spreading through the city like a wildfire. In the dark corners of the underworld, men were talking. They didn't see a romantic hero, they saw a target. The invisible architecture of protection that Malcom had built around Mila was now being tested by people who wanted to see him fail. Jax walked into the kitchen where Mila was making tea. His face was pale, and he was checking his phone every few seconds. "The rival families are moving," he said, his voice tight. "They saw how Malcom looked at you at the ball. Now they think if they can get to you, they can break him." Mila set the teacup down carefully. She didn't let her hands shake. "They think I am his weakness," she said softly. "They think you are the only way to make him surrender," Jax replied. "Thomas was right. By showing the world you are his, he gave them a map to his heart." Suddenly, the house felt different. The high walls and heavy doors felt more like a fortress than a home. Malcom joined them, his arm still in a sling but his eyes burning with a dangerous light. He had heard Jax's report. He walked over to Mila and pulled her into a protective embrace. He moaned low in his throat, a sound of pure frustration. He had wanted to give her a normal life, but his past was a shadow that refused to leave them alone. "I have doubled the guards," Malcom told her, his voice deep and serious. "Miller is watching the perimeter, and Jax will be with you every second I am not. They are trying to create a ripple of fear. But they don't know how far I will go to keep you safe." The romantic warmth of the morning was replaced by a cold tension. Every time a car drove past the gate or a phone rang, the air in the room became heavy. Malcom stayed by the window, watching the street like a hawk. He was no longer just a boss. He was a man guarding the only thing that made his life worth living. The ripple effect of his love had started a war he hadn't planned for. He looked at Mila, who was standing tall despite the danger. He realized that the mysterious encounter that changed everything had also put a target on their backs. He wasn't just fighting for territory anymore. He was fighting for the right to love her in a world that only understood hate. The stakes were higher than ever, and Malcom knew that if he failed, he would lose the only light he had ever found in the dark. The air inside the mansion felt like a storm was about to break. Malcom stood in the center of his dark office, staring at a map of the shipping docks. His enemies had finally made their move. They had blocked his most important business deal, a move that would cost him millions and threaten his power. Thomas stood by the door, his face hard. "You have to go to the docks tonight, Malcom. If you don't show your face and use your sword, the other families will think you have grown weak because of the girl." Malcom gripped the edge of his desk. He knew Thomas was right about the business, but his heart was upstairs with Mila. Just as he turned to leave, the door opened and Mila walked in. She wasn't wearing a fancy dress. She was in a simple silk robe, her dark hair falling over her shoulders. When her eyes met his, the cold plans for war in Malcom's head melted away. "You're leaving," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Malcom walked toward her, his heavy boots loud on the floor. "I have to protect what is ours, Mila." "Then protect us here," she whispered, stepping into his space. She reached up and pulled his tie loose, her fingers brushing against his skin. The fire that had been simmering between them for weeks suddenly flared up. Malcom forgot about the docks, the money, and the rival families. He didn't care about being a boss in that moment. He picked her up, and they didn't even make it to the bedroom. Right there in the dim light of the hallway, against the cold stone wall, he held her like she was the only thing that mattered in the world. Their passion was loud and rhythmic, a romantic battle that left them both breathless. In the heat of their love, Malcom let out a long, deep moan that echoed through the empty hall. He realized that his real power wasn't in his guns or his money. It was in the way Mila made him feel alive. Every time they were together in these odd, hurried places, he felt his cold ambition cracking even further. Later, as they lay tangled together on the floor, the moon shining through the hallway window, Malcom made his choice. He reached for his phone and called Jax. "Cancel the meeting at the docks," he ordered, his voice thick with emotion. "Let them take the territory. I'm staying here." Thomas watched from the shadows, shaking his head, but Malcom didn't care. He chose Mila over the sword. He chose the fire in her eyes over the cold steel of his past. As he held her close, he knew the war was coming, but he finally had something worth fighting for. The mysterious encounter had turned into a love that was more powerful than any empire. The war that Thomas had feared never came to pass. When Malcom chose Mila over the shipping docks, his enemies were so confused by his move that they backed away. They thought he was setting a trap, but Malcom didn't have a plan for war anymore. He only had a plan for love. The mansion was no longer a silent, scary place. It was filled with music, laughter, and the heat of two people who could not stay apart. Their passion grew stronger every single day. They found themselves caught up in romantic moments in every corner of the large estate. One afternoon, the fire flared up in the library, surrounded by old books and the scent of leather. Later, it was a late-night encounter in the kitchen, the cool marble of the counter feeling smooth against their skin as they shared a deep, rhythmic connection. Malcom's moans of pleasure became the soundtrack of the house. He was no longer the man who used women like toys. He was a man who worshipped the very ground Mila walked on. He found that the more he gave her his heart, the more he wanted to give her his name. Even in the grand hallway, under the glow of the crystal lights, they would stop to hold each other. Malcom would lift her up, his strong arms reminding her that she was safe, while her soft voice whispered promises of forever. Every touch was an explosion of feeling, a climax of emotion that made the rest of the world disappear. He didn't care about being a boss, he only cared about being her husband. One evening, under a sky full of bright stars, Malcom led Mila to the center of the garden. The air was soft and smelled like the white lilies she loved so much. He didn't look like a scary mafia boss in that moment. He looked like a man who had finally found his way home. He dropped to one knee, his large, scarred hand shaking as he held out a ring that sparkled like the city lights. "Mila, I spent 40 years living in the dark," Malcom said, his voice deep and full of love. "I thought power was about fear, but now I know that true power is having you by my side. I don't want a temporary deal. I want a forever contract. Will you marry me?" Mila didn't hesitate. She pulled him up and kissed him with a fire that promised a lifetime of happiness. They were married in a small, beautiful ceremony right there in the garden. Jax, Miller, and even a smiling Thomas watched as the king finally became whole. The mysterious encounter that started with a single night had turned into a love that had no borders. As the sun set on their wedding day, Malcom held his wife close, knowing he would never let her go. Can a love born in the shadows survive the light of day? Malcom and Mila proved that even the most ruthless heart can be tamed by the right person. If you loved this intense mafia romance, hit the like button and subscribe to join our family. Don't forget to comment below. Love wins if you believe everyone deserves a second chance at happiness.